Hi, everyone. It's just so lovely to be here with you today. I'm Meg Faure. I'm an occupational therapist, and my background is in early childhood. I've never done anything except work with moms and little ones, and it's because I'm so passionate about this age group. What we know deep in our hearts is the impact of what we do in the early years has lifelong consequences. And so today's conversation is very, very important. We are not just teaching little children, we are actually shaping the world that they will inherit and how they will be able to behave in that world. Because the world that we were taught to teach children to grow up into no longer exists. That world is gone. And so we need to prepare children for a different world. And so the age-old traditional forms of education and preparing children for education are very different now. And so that's why today we're going to be talking quite a bit about school readiness, but more than that, around learning readiness and around play and whether or not play can actually tick the boxes. So what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to talk a little bit about what school readiness means and why learning readiness is actually something that we should really be focusing in on. And then we're going to look at how play can actually support both agendas, both school readiness and learning readiness. So I think what's important to recognize right up front is what school readiness is. And this is really something that most of us were taught. There are the things that schools are measured against. It's how we measure our children. And if a child is going into primary school out of one of your ECD classes, this is what they're looking for. And these are what we call the domains of readiness. And traditionally, they've been centered around these 6 things: self-care skills, language skills, motor skills, including fine motor skills, emergent numeracy, and emotional maturity. And if you have a look at all the tick boxes that we're supposed to tick to get little ones ready for school, that's what it looks like. Now, the problem is that very often these are really seen as tick boxes. And so if a child has to skip 3 skips in order to be school ready, then we teach them how to do that, and we develop what are called splinter skills. So these are skills that are just useful in the context of that situation. And actually, what's important is to question whether or not we're actually preparing them for learning. So there are some pros to school readiness, and we understand that. So we know that particularly when you're talking about educating children in very large groups, we want to know that when they exit nursery school or play school, they're going into a school where they are equipped with certain foundational skills. So we understand that the term school readiness was maybe something that was important historically. The problem is that when we look at school readiness, there's become this incredible focus on get children ready with these splinter skills. And that very often includes having children, tick certain boxes. And there was an incredible study that was done just a couple of years ago called the Tennessee Pre-K study, where they took a group of children and they put them into a classroom situation that was highly charged, very focused. We're going to get these children school ready. And so what they did in this Tennessee Pre-K study is they paid teachers more because they wanted to attract all the best teachers and make sure that they were, they had the best staff. They had very long school days, so they made sure the children were in school, and it was really like a 10-hour school day. And then they gave them lots of worksheets and lots of focused work that would prepare them for grade 1 or grade R, or kindergarten as it was obviously in America. And then they measured these children. A year later, they had a look at them, and were they more school ready? Yes, they were. They all seemed to be flying. They then measured them again in about grade 3 and then again in grade 6. And what they found was utterly devastating. They found that the children who had gone through the Tennessee Pre-K study were more likely to have conduct disorders and to hate learning. And so they behaved badly in the classroom. And what's more, they had more learning difficulties. So this is obviously confounding. How does this happen? The children that have been hothoused in an amazing curriculum with incredible teachers, why do they end up doing worse later in school? It wasn't what was contained in the curriculum. It was what wasn't contained in the curriculum, because the one thing that was missing in that curriculum was time for play. And so in that context, we're going to talk a little bit today about the world that we're preparing our children for and how we can do it a little bit better. So the world has changed. On the left-hand side of the slide, you will see the way in which education was positioned in years gone by. We needed to prepare children for standardized roles in hierarchical systems. They needed to be able to work in a post office and do work that was really quite repetitive. Maybe they had to work in the fields. So it was a very different world that we were preparing children for. There was a lot of repetition and memorization needed. There was no such thing as Google, never mind GPT. And so we had to contain all the information in our heads. Some of you might actually be old enough to remember the days when you could remember 10 people's phone numbers. I can't do that anymore. And that's because in those days, we had to be able to remember things and contain information in our minds. Traditionally, education was teacher-led and top-down instruction because we had to educate people en masse with the same content. Everyone needed to hold an encyclopedia in their mind. And we prepared them for job security, not adaptability. So that was our world gone by. Our world is completely changed. And in actual fact, when I started doing this talk back in 2020 during COVID, it's changed since then even, because now we've got artificial intelligence as well. AI is entirely disrupting our work world because AI can analyze data, it can generate content, and it can automate tasks. These are the things that we were teaching children to do 20 years ago in class. They do not need to do that anymore. The world of automation means that any repetitive task and mundane workflows, assembly lines, those are things of the past. We do not need to equip our children to do automated tasks anymore. And one of the big things that's coming through now is information overload. Just scroll through your Instagram feed or through your LinkedIn feed. What you've got to be able to do is you've got to be able to think about what you're reading. You don't need to be able to read it anymore. You need to be able to work through the information and work out what's important for you and what isn't. So what does that mean for us? It means that we've got to raise critical thinkers, creative minds, and emotionally intelligent human beings, because those are the things that AI can't do. We need to have problem solvers and innovators, people who can come up with new ideas, because those are the things that AI and automation can't do. And we need to raise people who are critical thinkers and don't take things at face value. Just last week, I was going through my LinkedIn feed and I came across this wonderful post by Stephen Bartlett, who was looking for a new person to fill a role in his company. And what I found, and what I think is absolute gold, are the 4 things that he wants to find in a person: people with high agency, highly adaptable, curious minds, and ready to experiment. Now, you tell me which of those boxes gets ticked with a school readiness test. I'm going to say none of them, because we are preparing little ones' minds to think differently. So we're going to talk about what we are preparing little ones for now. And I just want to preface this conversation by saying the most important thing that we are preparing children for is social and emotional connection. Little ones need to come into our classroom feeling strong, having high senses of self-worth, and hopefully that will have come through from their early parenting, which is the work that I do in Parent Sense. We're very focused on that. But the piece that falls to us is the part of self-regulation, because if I can regulate my behavior, my emotions, and the way that I think, the critical thinking, I'm going to fly in the world. So let's take what Stephen Bartlett said in our previous slide, and let's take it down to 5 things that I believe should be on every school readiness, or let's rather call it learning readiness challenge. The first one is our children need to have cognitive flexibility and problem solving. This is flexible thinking, being able to solve problems, adapt to new situations. They do need numeracy and language, but they really need to be able to have logical reasoning as they approach problems. Very importantly, they need to be creative and have curiosity. They need to question why. And the problem with old-fashioned education systems is our children never questioned why. And if we don't question why, we kill our curiosity in our little ones' minds. Communication and language was always there. Even in the early school readiness tests, we needed literacy levels. But now we need to be able to communicate with people with intent. We need to be able to listen and to understand. Our little ones need social, emotional, and collaborative skills because we need to be able to work in teams. We need to be able to be adaptive, which means that we can have emotional resilience and be able to bounce when things change direction. And right now in business, if you're not bouncing and you're not resilient, you're not going to keep up. And then, of course, our little ones need physical agency, which is power within their bodies to know that I can accomplish something, and independence, which does speak to the early school readiness tick box of ADL, or activities of daily living independence. But these, I believe, are much more important than the tick boxes that were involved in early school readiness. So now what we're going to do is we're going to turn our attention and we're going to have a look at how play encourages this. Because the reality is that when we were looking at early school readiness, a lot of that, and as I mentioned, was developed as splinter skills, could be done through worksheets, tabletop activities, and rote learning. But if you look at these ones over here, these 5 criteria, there's no ways you can do this on a worksheet. There's no ways you can do this sitting behind a desk looking at a screen. These things involve real world activity, which for a child is, of course, play. So let's start with our very first one. If we're wanting to develop cognitive flexibility and problem solving, how can we do this in our classrooms? Well, one of the best ways to do it is through imaginary play, because when we are imagining that we are something, doing something, stepping outside of our real world, we learn to see things from different perspectives. We can generate lots of different solutions. And one of a lovely activity that you can do is in an imaginary play session in your classroom, you can do something like ask questions and throw in a problem, like give them a problem. So, kids, we're going to go on a bear hunt today. Oh, no. Look what's happened. It's raining. What are we going to do? And so we start to create challenges for our little ones. We ask them questions, or who do you want to be today? Or what can this prop be in this activity? And when you ask these questions about who are you, what props can you use, how are you challenged by a problem, what do? You create flexible thinking. You cannot do that at a desk and a worksheet. You can only do that through imaginary play. Another very important way to develop problem solving is by giving open-ended activities. And the problem with a lot of the activities in traditional early education was that it was very outcomes focused. So we are building this puzzle and it's going to look like this. You're painting this picture and it needs to look like that. And what we really need to do is say, well, here's a scenario. What are we going to do? And I'm sure you've heard about the research that Lego did when they put a whole lot of pieces of Lego in front of a group of children and told them to build whatever they want. And then in front of another group of children, they put a Lego kit that had to be built exactly as it had to be. And they found that the kids who had an open-ended Lego activity were much better at problem solving later on. Things like sensory integration and sensory play also encourages the development of problem solving as well. And then one of the things that also feeds into that is guided scaffolding. So we're not talking about just giving children an open playground and saying, go and play. We're saying have a teacher who's actually involved, who gives them the questions, who scaffolds them to a higher level of development. And when we're doing that, we are performing the role as a teacher of a co-player. So this is going to be a new word and we're going to bring it up again later, but you need to be somebody who plays with children to be able to challenge them to solve problems. What about creativity and curiosity? Well, of course, imaginary play sparks innovation. Theme-based play is wonderful because that fuels curiosity. And so having a theme for the week, whether it's dinosaurs, the spaceman, the sea theme, it doesn't matter what environment you're teaching children, whether it's grassroots or it's more enriched school environments. Having a theme actually makes them have to think out the box and think about, wow, what does that person do? What happens in that job? And gives them a whole lot more language as well. So we love having themed-based exploration. And then also having open-ended materials that encourage experimentation. In terms of communication and language, and this is very important, we know that kids are going to need this for the future. They're going to need to be able to sort through information that comes to them through language, for instance, on ChatGPT or on LinkedIn or wherever they're encountering it. And then they need to be able to have logic and be able to really read and disseminate information. So there's a few ways we can do that. Pretend play encourages language. One of the things we do in Play Sense is we actually give our teachers a list of words that are theme related that they have to make sure that they embed into every pretend play activity. And I'll never forget a situation where a 2-year-old went to the doctor and the doctor said, open wide. And the 2-year-old looked at him after the doctor had looked in his mouth, and the 2-year-old said, can you see my tonsils? And the doctor looked at the mom and said, wow, how do they know the word tonsils? Now that only happens if in your education program, you've got a doctor theme or a hospital theme and you're using proper words. So pretend play allows our little doctors to learn the words that they're going to use later. Sensory sound play like rhymes and rhythms and book reading and so on supports phonological awareness. Storytelling and books are absolutely vital and can be embedded into play curriculums. And then, of course, guided group interaction of asking questions, taking turns, listening to what each other said, are all ways that we can use the play environment in our classrooms to develop communication and language. Second last, we look at social and emotional collaborative skills. And again, we come back to imaginary play. I know I keep saying it, but letting children play with imagination allows them to put themselves into a new role, play with another person, and then put themselves in that person's position as well. So it allows them to develop empathy and to develop perspective taking when it comes to other children in their group. Another thing that we believe very strongly in Play Sense is a small group setting. Large classrooms of yesteryear, where we could educate everybody on the same curriculum, is not the way to do early childhood development. Early childhood development belongs in a small group situation. And the reason for that is that in intimate environments, we allow children to practice sharing and turn taking, resolving conflict, and cooperating with each other. And we do this by supporting them as teachers. And then, of course, emotional language and co-regulation is actively taught when we give children words for how they're feeling, words for how their peer is feeling, and how to put themselves in another person's shoes. All of this happens in your classroom through play. And then finally, physical agency and independence is, of course, something that's still very, very important. It always was in our early school readiness tests, but we can do this through play-based activities. A play-based activity where children actually have to get dressed with putting on different things like different hats and glasses, improves their self-care skills for dressing. Fine motor play with things like Lego and Play-Doh and paint and finger paint and chalk on the ground. This all develops fine motor. And how does it do it? It does it through play. So drawing an outline of your friend with a piece of chalk around him on some cement outside does way more than sitting and trying to join the dots on a worksheet. Gross motor play develops body confidence, body awareness, and confidence on the sports field as well. So these are all ways in which play feeds into physical agency. So I think that what I have positioned today is that school readiness has a place, but learning readiness has a way bigger place, because we're not preparing our children for grade R, we're not preparing them for grade 1, we're not preparing them for rote learning, we're preparing them for a real world and the world in which they're going to be playing. And the way that we do that best is through play, because we can ignite their imagination, their curiosity, and their creativity. So today I want to leave you with 3 take-homes. The first one is that school readiness does matter, but we've got to broaden it to include learning readiness for a changing world. We are preparing our children for a world we cannot even imagine, and that 3 years ago we had no idea would be there. That's what we're preparing our children for. The second thing that we need to take home today is to know that play is where the magic sits. It's where the learning happens, and it's where we can spark creativity and curiosity and executive function. And we can prepare them to take on AI and automation with agency. And then the final take home is your role. You are so critically important. You are doing the most important job in the world. You're preparing our children for a future that we don't know about. So you need to intentionally scaffold playful experiences into the classroom so that you can build all of these competencies. The key words here today is you're going to be a co-player and a co-regulator for the little ones in your classroom. So today, I really thank you for your time. I hope this has sparked something in you. It has excited you. And if you want to be part of this journey, we would love for you to be able to join us in our play-based learning program that is starting on the 1st of October. So just in a couple of weeks' time, we go through a 3-week program where we unlock the magic of play. It entails a talk with myself, Meg Faure, and Lara Schoenfeld, who developed Play Sense, and then 3 weeks of self-learning, and it's all SACE accredited. And at the end of it, we come back together, we share our learning, and we ignite our classrooms. So please join us on this journey.